So yes, this caught my eye, and what stood out for me was, well, if even Bill Shorten is struggling with silos, then probably the rest of us have some permission to do the same. Um, and in my work across organisations with stakeholders, New Zealand, Australia, recently in Saudi Arabia, the thing that has stood out all that time is, doesn't matter where you are, silos are silos, and so they're pretty ubiquitous. Whether it's between the big picture agencies like the minister would be grappling with, or whether it's my team and their team, whether it's me and my external stakeholders, the sorts of thing that you've just been talking about, Rob. They're there, aren't they? And they can harden, can't they? They can harden into these things which become ultimately, instead of collaboration, we get competition, that fight for control, that fight for whether it's budget or whatever, or status. That's pretty common stuff. I was with a client last year working a big road project, and there was the commissioner and the contractor, the constructor, big road thing. And by the time I got there, they were meant to be working together, but they called me in because it wasn't very healthy. And the words I were hearing were things like, you're using the big stick, or you're not being careful enough, or you just care about the money, or you're being unreasonable. That sort of, these silos had hardened into a sort of unworkable relationship, really. And then more recently, working in Saudi Arabia with a local government agency, and they were terrific, smart, capable. They were the planning group, the innovation group, and their mission was to come up with ways to make the city more visitable, bed nights for tourists. And they had done terrific work, but of course their pain was there wasn't a shovel in the building. They didn't build anything. It was all about working with others who build stuff, and it wasn't happening across that silo. So, how do we get them to agree with us was kind of the question when I got there. So these things are ubiquitous at all sorts of scales. And I think what I see, and you've probably got your own experiences of this, relationships breaking down, parties blame each other, you're being difficult, you've got some ulterior motive, I can't trust you. Sometimes we blame ourselves. It's me, I'm not managing this very well, we don't have the skills. And I think the big thing is, if we're confronting this sort of problem across our stakeholders, the tendency is to do more of what we know, to try and do it better, just sort of put more effort into clarity of communication or whatever it is, or we've got to get a better agenda on our meeting. We've got to get a smarter comms person in. It's sort of business as usual, but we've got to somehow do that better, and we invest all our effort in doing that. And, we get stuck in those collaborations that don't work. It reminds me of a conversation I had just 2 weeks ago. A client rang, a long-term client, and said, I've got a meeting coming up on Friday. Can we set up a meeting to talk tomorrow, just before that other stakeholder meeting? Because we've just been doing some work with them out there on the site, and it was really terrible. It's really hard, and I've got to go and have another meeting with them on Friday to talk about the next thing, and I don't know what to do. It's really difficult. So sure enough, we set up a meeting on Teams the next afternoon. She and her manager came on, and talking about what to do. And I heard the manager chime in. We just have to be clear about our non-negotiables. That's what we've got to do. It was sort of, we have to be even clearer and draw a harder line than we took in last time, because that's all I know what to do. And of course, we were able to reframe it from that. Yes, you could do that, but why don't we talk about what's important to us? And before we do that, why don't we start to ask some questions about, why don't you have a conversation like, well, if what was that like for you? What was that experience like? Because here's what it was like for us. So that's the sort of thing that I'm seeing. people trying just to do more of what they do. And of course, none of us can fix this stuff. These things are permanent. We like to restructure because that's supposed to make these problems go away. But if it did work, then we'd all be fixed, wouldn't we? There wouldn't be any more restructures. We can't fix them, but I think what I want to talk about is what we can do. And I think it's as simple and as sophisticated, really, as of these three things that I want to talk about. Get together and talk, have a different sort of conversation, and just try stuff. So we'll just work quickly through those. Get in the room. Get in the room when we can. So many of us don't do that, and if we have to do it online, then do it online. You know, this is a reality, absolutely. But how do we meet online and have conversations as though we were in the room? I mean, this is the photo from just last week. 60 people, state government, a division. They were all the senior leadership team and directors. This group had existed since 2017. This is the first time they've been in the same room together. And it just struck me as, all right, how do you work as a team when you've never even seen each other in the flesh? So this day I designed it so there was plenty of space, plenty of conversation, plenty of just getting up and talking about stuff on the wall, that sort of thing. Because so often when we're together, it's about the transaction, when in fact, it's relationships or conversations build relationships, relationships allow the transaction. And so often we're focused on the transaction, and out of that builds the silos, the differences. If we're trying to break down and work across silos, we've got to be doing something different, and that is just having conversation. We've got to be curious about each other, walk in each other's shoes, and we've got to be asking and listening, not telling. And so this day, the feedback since has been that was really useful. It was great just to get to know people and get to talk. So getting in the room together where we can, having conversation, I think is an undervalued part. I always, whenever I'm running a workshop, the client at the end of it says, "Oh, that was great. That was so useful." And so my riposte is, well, why didn't you do it yesterday, last year, last week? Why don't you do it a whole lot more? Because it's always useful. So get in the room together. Different sorts of conversation. So not just trying to do what we've always done better, but different sort of conversation. And again, this less focus on the content. Stop trying to do the work so much when we're together. That's obviously important. It's a given. But what we try to do in addition is just talk. And we're trying to, part of what we can talk about is how does it feel? So we're looking for a different conversation. We're looking to be curious. We're looking to explore how it looks from the other side. And this thing about emotions, how often have we all heard, well, let's keep it professional. Let's, park our emotions or whatever. Yes, but if we're trying to build connections, then it's tell me about how it feels. Acknowledge our emotions. And what does that tell us? It's data. So how is it feeling when you work with us? When we did that thing last week, what was that like? And because when you did that thing last week, this is what it felt like to us. What does that mean for how we work together? So it's just using it as data. It's exactly my client who had that meeting to go to. And she said, once we went in and started to ask them about their experience of working with us on this project, they had ample opportunity to tell us, and then they started to show some interest in what was important to us, and there was definite overlap, and it all was so much better than going in to say, here's our non-negotiables, take it or leave it. So curiosity. This thing about naming stuff, I like this one. I think it's important, and I think we can all do it anytime. It's getting stuff on the table across those silos. So, instead of avoidance or assumption. It's, if I was in your shoes, if I was sitting on your side of this contract or this project, I might feel like we're wielding the big stick. Is that how it feels? I can see how that could happen. Is that right? Or if I was sitting where you're sitting, I probably wouldn't trust our data. Why would you? Because you're not seeing where it's coming from. Is that right? How does our data seem from where you sit? Or this is our thing, so I understand that where you are, it must be really hard to create the headspace to even consider this from our perspective. Is that right? What's that like? What does that mean? What are the implications? So, I can get that stuff on the table. I can name it instead of, otherwise it's assumptions. My assumptions about them, well, they don't like me. They don't trust our data. Their assumptions about me, they're hiding something from us. Let's get it on the table and let's just make that ordinary, course of business. If I was there, well, of course I wouldn't trust my data. That feels pretty normal to me. So what do we do about that? What's going to increase that trust? How do we do that a little differently? What do we want to try next time? So normalizing these things, and we can all do that, a little bit of it, just by naming it as we go. And the third thing, again, we're not here to fix our silos. Silos will outlive us. I'm fairly confident of that. And often that can be quite paralyzing. The system's broken. I've got no power, no control. It's overwhelming. It's chaotic. It's hard to get anything done. What I find can be really empowering, it certainly helps me, is this thinking about just try stuff, small stuff, little things, like naming it. But any little thing, what can I do today? What can I do at that meeting tomorrow that's going to take us in the direction of curiosity, that's going to demonstrate curiosity, that's going to dial up the listening, dial up the walking in each other's shoes? What little thing can I try? Who can I pick up the phone to right now? What act can I take? What action can I take that's going to help that silo dissolve rather than harden? So, always the question is, what does less silo, more collaboration look like this afternoon, tomorrow, this week? What are we going to do? What can we try? And by way of example, here's some suggestions. What might that look like? Can look like a million different things, and it's all about your context. These are the things I've seen work over the years, or at least attempted. Do they work? Well, can't be sure, but it's more likely than not that pairing up across those silos, being a buddy and talking to each other regularly across that barrier, it's going to break down the silo rather than build it up, one would expect. Let them take control, give them some ownership of the presentation or the content or the agenda next time, whoever they are. Even set the room up differently, get rid of the tables, sit together, sit in small groups, don't sit at all, stand up, look at stuff on the wall rather than presentation, just do something different that feels like us together, not us and them. Eat lunch together. This one comes from a story working with City of Sydney years ago, and a big division. It's a big council, plenty of money, lots of property to manage. And I was working with the property management division, and they had all their big team, maybe 50 people. And they also had two really important contractors who were co-located. They were actually in the building, and they did property maintenance and other stuff. So there were 3 points of the triangle, and they were all meant to work seamlessly together, and of course, not. So we got to this point. Well, what are you going to try this week? What can you try just to build that connection? And this bottom suggestion, there was one bloke in that room on this particular day, the only guy in the high vis, probably the only person in the room without a university degree. He was the safety guy. And his idea was, why don't we eat lunch together next Thursday? And yeah, okay, let's try. And got everyone in the lunchroom. And I happened to be there next Thursday. I was up doing some coaching or something. And you could see them. They were sitting, talking, chatting, yakking. You could see the silos dissolving. you could almost see it happening before our eyes. It's much more likely than not that if we do that regularly, it will improve rather than worsen. And just to make it even more real, this is a group I worked with, might have been May or June. Again, state government, geographically quite separate and separated, and they hardly ever get together. So this was a time when they were together, and they recognised that, well, we're not really working as a team. We're working in our own little silos. So what are you going to do? And here were their suggestions. And these are the things they were going to try and have been trying. The one I like was the trivia night they had that night in town together before they all flew out the next day. So they were off to the pub for pub trivia. And, it's a good example of conversation, relationship, not transaction. And all that stuff is important. So this was them. This was their world, their context. How do we do things differently? That's all it was. They can't fix the fact that they're working in different sites. They can't fix the fact they're working on different projects, but they can. They've got little levers and dials. We all do. And we can pull those levers and turn those dials, even in small ways. And all of that helps, change things up a little bit. So that's fundamentally all I've got at this point. Get together and talk online in some ways, walk together, have lunch together, whatever that looks like. Chat, conversation to build relationships. Relationships allow the transaction. So this is about the conversation. Talk about different things, put the content down, talk about our experiences of each other. What does it look like from where you sit? What works, what isn't working, what feels exciting? How do we look from where you are? And try stuff. We can all try stuff this afternoon. We can do stuff. We're all empowered to improve how we're working with them over there, whoever that is, even in a world where, things are pretty rigid and difficult. So that's kind of all I wanted to throw at you, but I wondered if you've got anything to add. You've all got your own experiences about this, anything to contribute, any questions, either turn your mic on or into chat or whatever. I'm going to stop sharing now. Anything to add to that? What's your experience? Any questions? Blinding flashes of the obvious?
Well, Matt, are you about to go? About to say something? Yeah.
Matt, your mic's off. Yeah, okay. Rob, you go. Pop it into chat, Matt.
Yeah, I was going to say, in that first part of the presentation, when you're talking about people making accusations about you're only interested in this, you're only interested in that, those accusations which are presumably highly emotionally charged, but there's a difference between that kind of emotion and the emotion you're talking about in the the second section about you've got to acknowledge emotions, that that's not being unprofessional, but it's how do you help people to express their authentic emotions, but in a professional way. Does that make sense? I'm not refuting the importance of emotions and working with them, but it's about how to help people express it in a way that's actually not attacking.
Yes. Yes, I'm, as someone who's sort of facilitated a lot of meetings, sometimes quite angry meetings over the years, I've had to kind of work my way through that a little bit, that in the moment stuff. And partly, it's learning to be okay with it. That's something I have learned. So someone is angry and they're angry at me. Well, that's okay. I might be angry at me if I was sitting where they are too, but how do we use that usefully? What's that telling us? So that would be part of it. I think naming it first. I can imagine that some of you are pretty angry about this. Is that right? Yeah, absolutely right. And okay, so that's telling us something important. What's that telling us? You know, not trying to manage it, but sometimes getting in first and naming it is, I have found that it doesn't make the problem go away, but it's a strategy I have employed at least. If I name it first, I'm sure there's a lot of passion in this room, and probably a couple of you would be glad to see the back of me. Is that right? Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's good to know. It's important to know. And, I hope by the end of this, I can have more insight into where that's coming from, because that's what I'm interested in. What's driving that? And so tell me what's driving it. Yeah, it's not the complete answer by any means, Rob, is it? But it's something that I have done.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And if I were to, what's that for me in terms of framing it? It's that thing of helping people to, as it were, describe their emotions rather than, so to describe that they're angry rather than act angrily. That if they're given the opportunity to describe it, they don't have to act out. They
yes, and again,
validating.
That's right, and even where there is doing and people are angry, again, I've learned that that's really useful data, and I learned to be okay. It used to freak me out, and I have found that sometimes at the front of the room, that what I do really matters to the group, so how I respond to that matters. So the more, if I can be okay with it, if I'm looking okay, like this is really useful anger, then other people can relax a bit and it won't freak everyone out so much, and it's not so stressful and horrible and embarrassing and awful. It's just, okay, that anger is anger. What does that tell us? Is anyone else seeing things differently? It's just being okay with what's happening is part of that. We can't shut it down.
That's helpful. Yeah.
So Matt, I'm just looking at yours. I think part of moving silos, how quickly the barriers can come up. Yeah. Yes, it does happen really fast. One assumption, because we're all looking for data all the time, aren't we? But we're probably scanning for data that you don't really care, or this is another fantasy project that government's doing to me or doing to us, or if I'm scanning for that data, I'll find it. And so the smallest little comment or thing just validates that fear, and there's the wall. I've already built it. I've walked into the room with that wall in my head. Again, kind of naming some of this stuff. If I was sitting where you are, you'd probably think that, here we go again. My strategy might be to keep my head down and wait for this all to blow over. Is that right? Because I've been there too, is that how it's feeling? Or if not that, then, so how is it feeling? Because sometimes in these cases, it feels like we are doing to you, not doing with. Is that how it's feeling now? If so, what does that tell us? Yeah, that naming stuff, I think, can be quite powerful in these situations. Naming the potential silos even before they've happened. Naming assumptions. You might be assuming that I'm here just to roll over you in our project steamroller. Is that how it looks? Stuff like. So I'll send you out a copy of this and a copy of the video. All right. Thanks everyone. Go well and bust your silos. Cheers. See you
or
then.
build
Bye-bye.
pipes between them.
Yes. Quite.